Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Teacher Time with the Bill of Rights Institute. We are here in the beginning of March 2021, and as always, hoping to hear from you, whether it is during this stream live or in between episodes or in many different ways. We hope to just have a few moments of teacher time to talk about some of the interesting, important ideas that are on our minds as educators across the country. And so with you, as always, I'm Gary Coletti, Director of Programs here at the Bill of Rights Institute. And I'd like to introduce, of course, once again, Liz.
Hi, everybody. I'm Liz Evans. I am the Regional Programs Manager for the Bill of Rights Institute.
Awesome. And again, if you've been following along with these, we appear live every other week during the normal school year, shall we call it? And we hope that we'll hear from you. Feel free to jump in the chat area, and if we can catch them, we'd love to interact with you in that way. But there's always opportunities to interact with us in lots of different ways. And I mentioned it's the beginning of March, so if that's all right with everybody, I think it's time for our beginning. The way we like to start these episodes was to dive into the news cycle, just what's been going on since last episode 2 weeks ago, what's happening around here in the beginning of March. And I'd like to start, if that's all right, with what's on my mind, because this is the day after International Women's Day, but also the whole month is something to focus on that. So what has been your experience, Liz, of International Women's Day?
It is, to me, it's become this social media celebration, because if I'm being honest, like when I was in high school and college, I didn't really know a whole lot about this. And so for me, it's been really awesome to see, people sharing stories online, using this hashtag. And it's just been cool to watch, because my daughter is now having a different experience with International Women's Day than I had, because there's so much social media surrounding it, which I think is pretty cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's one of those, we have it in our news cycle because it's happening right now. And news doesn't always have to be completely unique. It can be something that happens every year. And I think you're right. It's interesting watching the evolution of celebrating that year after year. I mean, it does go back to 1907. So it's been celebrated, but like you said, it's each year, the way it is celebrated can be very different. I think for lots of reasons, we have had a number of years of social media celebrations of things. This year in particular, still a lot of people, kind of communicating digitally as we are right now. And so that definitely is watching how over the years it has been acknowledged, or in some cases not acknowledged as much as it probably could. And the impacts it's had over the decades that it's been around, I think is definitely really significant.
But I want you to tell the story of how it originated, because I just learned this right before this started.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's so interesting.
Yeah. So our teachers out there, maybe you teach U.S. history and things like that, but as a world history teacher, it definitely came up. It originated back in 1907, but it was a key part of the Russian Revolution. We told the story in class when we taught world history, how in Russia at the time, it was 1970, it was around 10 years later, it was about 1917, and I'm speaking very quickly. On International Women's Day, women took to the streets to partially celebrate, but mostly to protest what was going on. And the Tsar at the time ordered, as he had in years prior, the soldiers to raise their guns and possibly to shoot into the crowd. But in that year, the soldiers, seeing these women who were honoring this day, refused to shoot and turned upon their own officers. And that's sort of what got the ball rolling, to say, if they're turning on the officers, then what's the structure of the army? And if the structure of the army isn't there, kind of the whole governmental structure wasn't there. And the idea of you don't have to do what the Tsar is telling you was really spawned by these women starting this protest to celebrate a day that had been around for a number of years already at that point and continues to year after year.
I think that is so cool, because I guess I'd never thought about the origins of the day. I just, you celebrate it, and you see all these really cool things, and then to know that it goes back that far just absolutely blew my mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah. True. And again, I don't purport to be an expert in all the different ways it's been celebrated. You know, that's the thing. Is it the same as it has been for over 100 and some odd years? Who's to say? And I think that's part of what makes it interesting when it comes up again, to take a look at the way it's been honored year after year, in lots of different ways. Like you said before, with, you know, it's kind of social media based this year. What are some other ways?
Yeah.
Just to pivot real fast, because you know we like to move real fast on our episode. Recent news also, a big ongoing topic is about, of course, we can't ignore the fact that a global pandemic is happening. And one of the things we've noticed over the past year is, how do people make decisions upon recommendations? And I'm bringing that up because recently the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, if we have younger viewers out there, gave kind of new recommendations that were a little bit different than before. Can you tell us a little more about that?
So I briefly heard about this morning, because as more people are receiving their second vaccinations and considered fully vaccinated, the CDC has kind of changed some of the recommendations. So if you're, one of the things I think that I paid the most attention to is, if you have two fully vaccinated grandparents and their grandchildren are healthy, like, go hug your grandparents. And that to me was a huge shift, because I know, my daughter, a set of her grandparents live in Minnesota, and she hasn't seen them this whole time because it just wasn't a safe thing. And so the CDC, there's a lot of different recommendations that they have, just been sharing. And as a bureaucratic agency, that I think during the pandemic, most people have heard of the CDC. It's just been an interesting thing to watch it evolve, because things are so unpredictable. But then you hear things like this, and it's like, so are we coming out of it? Like, right. and recommendations change and shift all the time. But I think, to me, that was the thing that caught me this morning. Like, go see your grandparents if you are fully vaccinated. Like, there's all of these other things, and I'm probably oversimplifying it, but that to me is a big deal.
Yeah, it is. And it's one of those things that it's significant, because we are coming up on roughly a year since the word lockdown is, I think, is a bit strong, but I think it was around the teens of March that there was a concerted effort to not go out as much for many, many people. I feel like that was the time when a lot of businesses closed, when, there wasn't yet a phase one. This was prior to these phases. This was when we were searching for what can we do? And the word recommendation, I think, is very strong. These are, they didn't say you can or cannot do. It just, they made recommendations, and people are seeking, some help with this, and people can listen to lots of different ones. But I think that's significant that we've been continuously looking for it. I was originally, as you were saying it, thinking like, well, this is a big transition, but every week has been a transition in the past year, of a new approach, a new understanding, a new consideration. So it's amazing from my own perspective. I can't speak for others, that it's like a constant state of monitoring and vigilance, and what can we do, and what is tomorrow going to look like, and I don't know what next week looks like. And so having news like this is significant, and is part of, I think, a continuum.
Yeah, it stopped me in my tracks. I was like, wait, what? Because again, I mean, I work from home because I'm here in Arizona. My husband, who is a teacher, they've been back face to face since the middle of January, as has my daughter. And I think for me, it's a realization of every state and maybe even the bigger cities are just so different. So when we hear these recommendations from, a federal bureaucratic agency, the way states take those recommendations or do whatever with them is so different. And it's, it's federalism. It's what Texas opened up completely. Other states haven't. So it's an interesting a step back and look, when the CDC says something, how does that then change how states, apply laws?
Yeah, exactly. And again, this is a show for teachers, right? And so, that the decisions are right now being made, or have been made, about how students and classes are continuing on. And yeah, questioning upon what are these decisions made. Recommendations from lots of different places can be very powerful. Plans can be very powerful, the way it's laid out. So, but it's real world, right? I mean, tomorrow there's a decision to go into a classroom, to have hybrid, to all these things. And so that's part of the teacher's daily life, is to have to be aware and to be vigilant of what is not only one's own perception, but also what are other people's perception who are making decisions about the school I work in, right? Speaking from a teacher point of view,
Yeah.
on behalf of thousands. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and I can't believe you said like it's been a year, because last year we went on spring break and all of this started. And I know this because I got married right before everything hit. And then it was, well, I guess we're not going back for a couple weeks after. And then it was a couple more weeks, and then it was nothing. So that, just how much has happened in a year.
Yeah.
It's just so crazy to me.
Yeah, it's wild. So we're talking a lot about the choices and circumstances teachers find themselves in. And that's, I think it's time then for a new segment that we think is really, really important, because as we try to engage and talk about teaching, we realize it holds an interesting place that we like to say really exists both as an art and a science, right? So there's a basis for things. There's evidential structures for teaching, but there's also a certain form of art. There's certain choices that are made in all this, and I think that's actually a pretty good transition into that. So so it's a segment that I think will have a lot, kind of balancing how do teachers balance both the science of teaching and the art of teaching for themselves, for their schools, for students. And so our focus for this one is about meeting our students, right? That's the theme of this episode. And so that's a long way around to say, considering how teachers make choices upon which, they build structures, but also allow for the freedom, it raises the question about how you meet students. How, in the first times that you're meeting brand new people, human beings in your class, how do you develop culture together? How do you meet in a real way someone that you may not have ever experienced before? Now suddenly you have this ongoing relationship in a classroom.
I think that people don't realize, they think that teachers just walk in and start teaching and everything's great. And it's like, oh, that is not it. Because even when I taught middle school, I had 6 classes of 8th graders, and every kid is different and every class is different. And those mix of kids creates a different atmosphere than maybe they would, or a different personality than they would be in another class. And there's so much to think about and to consider, and look at these little people or big people. I mean, I had seniors too, but to me, they're still kids. Like, you are somebody's pride and joy. How can I take you and put you with 35 other kids in a classroom and make this a community where we're learning? It's not just me standing up telling you everything that I know.
Right.
This is now a learning environment in a classroom community. So my very favorite thing to do, and I learned this my 3rd year of teaching, is I had kids introduce themselves. Who are you? With my middle schoolers, I put up a map and I would give them a push pin, which I stopped doing that because I taught middle school, and inevitably somebody tried to stab somebody else.
Sharp objects, yeah.
Yes. But they got a push pin, and they would stand up, say their name, what they wanted to be called. So like everything on mine says Elizabeth, but I want to be called Liz.
That's true.
Because again, kids have nicknames, whatever. What do you want to be called? Because I want to be called something specific. So I want to make sure that I am acknowledging and honoring that with you. And then they would say, A is either your favorite vacation spot, or if you had to live anywhere in the world forever, you could never leave this place, where would you go? Because for me, it was just, what do you think? And some classes, it took us all class period, but I got to know my kids a little bit on that first day. And so asking them questions about themselves, because let's be honest, kids love talking about themselves.
We know a lot about that. Yeah.
They do. That's what they know. And it's a very, to me, it was a very low risk way of participating. It wasn't like some big question to ask.
Right. And yet it was meeting, right? There's a reason people do that when they meet each other, right? To say, let me give you a little bit of a background. And it sounds like a bit of a narrative of themselves, right? You get to kind of choose a little bit, especially if you're asking about places, right? There's some reason why they're picking one place versus another. It's very low stakes information. It's a nice geography thing, which is kind of cool. No, I love that. I think there's definitely something valuable always to having the vocalization of who someone has come from out there. I used to have students, the older students. I didn't have the middle school. I had taught high school, and it was they would meet each other first and then introduce the person you just spoke to. And so there was an interesting like how they convey to each other, but also how you listen to each other, and the idea that on the very first day there's someone else. But again, I'm no expert. I would love to hear, and I'm going to monitor to the side. We get these, I always call them pings from the chat. If you have a question or some way that you yourself have done that, there's so many ways. And I say that because teaching is such a varied art, but there's one thing all teachers have in common: a first day, right? And that first day, not only your very first day, but your first day every year, every time you get a new class, right? And so that first day is such a common experience for every single teacher out there. And yet the personal experience may be very, very different. So there's myriad ways to meet your students on their first day. I mean, I love yours. I did something because I mostly had social studies. Something that's actually reflected in our materials. We have something on citizenship about that's based in the Constitution. But I did prior to working here, did that in the classroom, which was if we were going to have classroom expectations, can we build them together? And it was an important way in the beginning of the year to have the dynamic not be, I'm telling you these rules, you better follow them or else, and rather, in order to function, we're going to be together for nearly 200 times. Let's have that be as pleasant as possible. I'm respecting, I don't know you at all, so I'm respecting you. I'm hoping you respecting me just because I'm another person. There's that human equality thing, but then there's also like to function, and this is kind of the science part, we have found ways, like everybody talking at once generally doesn't work for 200 days. It just kind of doesn't. It's not there's a rule that's written in stone. It's a rule that we together have sort of come up with as ways that we can function to get along with each other. So I always thought that was a really powerful way to kind of start the year. That was really great. Not that I invented it, but I'm just saying it was just really good to kind of establish like why we're all, the one thing we have in common is we're all in the same class, and that class is starting.
Well, and I think that when you do things like that with kids, they have ownership in the class, because we would do that with our Socratic seminars. Like, here's kind of the basis of how these are going to work. But as we go on, if you notice something that is not working, let's talk about it. Let's say like, hey, we are going to, we're going to make sure we're not talking over each other, because kids get excited and they want to talk, but having that buy-in to your classroom. I did not go over rules the first day because I was like, you're going to hear this like 7 more times. The basic rules in this class. Like, and as things come up, we'll address them. But other than that, like, I care more about how you are, not necessarily how you act today, or because you're not going to remember anything I tell you today. But you might remember, oh, hey, so-and-so wants to live in the same place I do. That's kind of cool.
Right.
It's just those little connectors, and that kind of stuff is fun. I think when you give them the onus to be a part of those conversations, it's a big deal.
Absolutely. And I think that's exactly right. That onus, because it's also, it's another definition. That's what I love about the word. It's another shade of meaning of the word meeting the students, right? It's meeting those specific students that year. And in that class on that day. And you're never going to get a combination of those exact places that they want to live, or exact ways that they perceive each other, or the exact ways that they establish and get off on that right start with each other. And so that ownership of having this communal experience of, we all had this first day together, what happened is, is an investment. You have that in common with each other. And I think that's exactly right.
I have got it at Target. It is very much modeled after the late Justice Ginsburg. And they're cards you can pull, and you can ask a question like, is cereal soup? Or
I've heard that more than
Halloween is the best holiday.
Well,
and having kids go to either side and then try to convince each other. And
right.
Again, very low stakes questions.
Yes.
We're not asking them to solve the world's problems. But even just that, because I used it to teach argumentative thesis writing. And I remember being like, I didn't really have to plan a whole lot. I just have to make sure the cards that I pull, are anything crazy. And it was so fun to watch them. And it gave me a window too into what group work would look like, what Socratic seminars would look like. What are these things going to kind of look like if I can do a quick formative assessment of how they act together and still meet them.
Right. There's the art part, right? There's the paying attention. There's the meta paying attention to, oh, this is how we interact. This is how we solve issues, things like that. No, I think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Lots of great ideas. Like I said, each individual teacher has countless ways of their own classroom. Multiply that by the number of teachers out there, multiply that by the number of classes, multiply that by the number of years teaching. There's no shortage. So as always, whether or not you're watching this live, we would love to hear your other ideas. But talking about these fun things makes me think that's, again, perfect segue to our next section, something that one often does in class, but I like to do now and continue with, which is, what teachers call it sometimes, brain break. Just not that this has been an onerous conversation, but it's fun to kind of take a little bit of a break and sort of like think creatively and so forth. So it's going to be a little bit of obviously teacher focus, because that's sort of what we have in common. That's what the show's about. But here's the brain break. Do you want to ask it? Or should I? I can ask it.
You can ask it.
Okay. We're like putting each other on. All right. So think about a favorite project or activity that you genuinely got to nerd out on. And yes, it may have been for class, but it really was actually something that you could not get enough of.
Mm-hmm. And I do encourage teachers to share, because this is, really why we're doing this is because if I start talking about my project, somebody might be like, ooh, I want to try that. And the more teachers share these kinds of things, the bigger that basket of these cool projects get. So, Gary keeps saying it, but please, even if we're not live, like share them on Twitter, share them.
What do you get excited about?
Yes. Anything to do with the Supreme Court, really, for me, because I would spend hours. So we would always do our final exam was always a moot court, and it was whatever case was currently in the Supreme Court. So there was no answers because we don't know yet. But I would spend hours listening to podcasts, and kids would ask questions, and it's like, oh my gosh, I don't know. Let's open our constitutions. And I remember a kid saying like, gosh, you're so smart. And I'm like, it's not that I'm smart. It's just that I'm really excited about it. Mm-hmm. And that's the fun part, is when you're really excited about something. And I was excited. So I'm like, oh yeah, I already researched that. Not because I want to make sure I'm prepared for class, but because I'm so just into things like that. And it's just, that's like, that for me was super fun. Because I think when kids see you get like really nerdy and excited about something, they might not say it, but they get excited about it.
Sure. It spreads like nothing else. There's the genuine, wow, you are really into this thing. And even if you use the word nerdy, it's funny. Even if the students I have found are like on the surface, like, oh my God, why do you care about this? Mm-hmm. The sheer interest you have in it is an indicator there must be something valuable to this if you're that into it. Mm-hmm. So no, you're absolutely right. again, there's probably countless examples of all of you out there. We just, for the sheer joy of teaching, let's just celebrate teaching. What just really gets you excited about teaching? That's something we like to keep asking, because it's the fire of what we do, right? So I do love that. Yeah, I will admit, your Supreme Court thing you have shared that. It is
I
it is an
love.
infectious interest that has inspired me to want to understand more, and it is a huge thing to understand. Understand's even a strong word. To explore, I would say. I haven't even approached understanding it.
Super exploratory. And because I always tell the kids, like, straight up, in June on Monday mornings, I wake up and I make myself a cup of coffee in my Supreme Court mug, and I sit and I wait for those opinions to come down, and I read them.
Yeah.
Like the Obergefell versus Hodges, the case on same-sex marriage, I read all 37 pages of Justice Roberts' dissent, because I was like, I need to know what you think. And they know, the kids know. And what's fun too is, like, what we would live tweet these things, but then when the case would come down, I would get messages from kids. Did you see this? Oh my gosh, we were right. We ruled this way. And it was really fun.
There's
what about you? Because I could sit and chat.
There's that connection that you have with the students, and they know it's, again, even if, again, they were like, maybe I wasn't, now they know you're interested, so they will see it. Suddenly I've absolutely noticed that students who would see something happen and be like, oh, did you catch this thing, that occurred in the news, that I don't know that. I'm not saying I caused it necessarily, but if the class was interested in it, then suddenly it's like hearing your own name at a party. It just catches you in a certain way. Yep. And I think students are definitely like that. No, that's great. And I also, when you were talking about that, actually, I was also thinking it's nice that those 30 some odd pages are public for you to read, right? That we live in a world where you can read that day when something's out there, these very transparent things, and you can read, you could watch online the entire, audio kind of everything, and you could do all that.
Well, and last year when they, like, you could listen to the arguments live, kids were like, this is so cool. And then, of course, the day that the random toilet flushed in the back, I was bombarded with messages like,
that showed they were watching.
Yeah, I understand that that's like cheesy or whatever, but it's something that grabs their attention and makes them want to know more. And it was really funny, because then it was like, we're never going to know who it was.
Right.
But did that take away from arguments? Did it make that, like, what are these things doing? So it's really fun.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's really fun. Yeah. Mine is, I'll go. I think I'll go for one. I think we may move quickly through the next pieces there, but I did want to share. When it comes to that, again, a project doesn't have to be like a specific written project. It could be like a concept, like yours is Supreme Court. Mine was counterfactuals. That always got me wild. So having students think of history in terms of what else could have happened, or what would have happened if something else occurred. And I think turning that into projects, I was inspired as a again, this is dating myself, but as a young person, if you remember, there was a series of books, Choose Your Own Adventure. And that company actually had another series called, and hopefully you could see it, it's called the Time Machine series. This one was about the American Revolution. And the Time Machine series was rooted much more in history. It wasn't these fantastical things, even though there's the premise that there's a time machine. That aside, the premise was you were going to go to an actual historical series of events, and you had a task within there to succeed. And the only way you can get through it, unlike Choose Your Own Adventure, there was only one ending. So if you were choosing incorrectly, you keep having to get tossed around and make more choices. But the secret to this books were, in the beginning, if you ever get your hands on these, they have basically like text, and they have basically a small textbook version of that time period with maps and actual historical figures, actual historical events. So the more a clever reader, or when you adapted to the classroom, a clever student was really listening or really kind of getting into it, you get, oh, here's why people made these decisions. You could try to do something else, but these are pretty intelligent people making decisions for very good reasons. no matter what the thing was, that led to the way history kind of played out in such a way. And you can try in lots of other ways, but it really got students to understand the humanity of why people did what they did throughout history and the repercussions of those choices. And so counterfactuals for me has always been the most fun. There are so many occasions in history where something could have been slightly different if a slightly different choice occurred that would have had major repercussions on everything. And so the study of history can really come to light that way, I think, in a really, really interesting way. That being said, I think it is time to move on. I'm just noticing time. Again, we always want to hear from you out there, whether or not you're watching this live. But this is a timed idea, something we like to call the 7-minute stretch. So I'm going to put on a clock for 7 minutes, and at the end of 7 minutes, even if I have incredible things to say, I'm not going to say them because we hit 7 minutes. Here's the 7-minute stretch. So the theme of this has been meeting students, and we interpreted that term in the beginning in terms of actually coming into contact with people for the first time. Who are they? There's also the idea of how do you meet students in terms of who they are in your class, where they are and where the class is going, and how do you meet them? How do you kind of bridge that? I think of the time when I was in teacher school, which is like what I like to call it, that the professors there gave really good advice about saying, you're not teaching yourself in your own high school experience. You are teaching the students who are in front of you on that day in this school and that year as who they are. And so that's sort of the 7 minutes starting now. The question is this: what does that connection with the students look like? How do you get to the point where you can meet students where they are?
It's an interesting question, and it is National Board Certified Teacher Week. And so for me, I remember going through the process of my National Board certification. And this is actually the story of how Liz met the Bill of Rights Institute a long time ago.
Origin story for those watching.
But I remember, I needed to just bump up my content knowledge. And I was very lucky that I could connect with kids. I'm from a really large family. Like that's just what we do. We're connectors. And I needed that, professional development. And the more I got into the stuff that BRI had, and there's a lot of really great people in our civic space too, the more I could connect with my kids. And, students are really funny because, and anybody who's a parent too knows, like every day your kids are different. And some days some things stick and some days they don't. For me, honestly, it was a constant curiosity. So I'm constantly curious about my content because I want to know more, but I'm also really curious about my kids. Who are these people and how do they learn? And, when we're in a Socratic seminar, I noticed that a couple of students aren't really talking, and I wonder why, and asking those questions. And I think that to me, it's always when somebody says, what does it look like? Like, what is the perfect connection between students and the curriculum? I don't know that necessarily exists because it's ever evolving. Mm-hmm. It is a constant curiosity about the people sitting in front of you, because then they'll start to share things. And it's really cool, the stuff that as you're learning your content, the things that can come out and the shared experiences that kids have that really enrich a curriculum in a way that a textbook or even just a teacher talking can't. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's my answer.
That's good. That's good. No, that's good. And I liked your framing of, as you were going through the process of, you were already a teacher for a while when you were doing
I started teaching in 2003. I started my national board process in 2008 and then certified in 2009. So I had gone through the those first 3 years of teaching where we want the kids to like me, but I have to be like, there's so many things that happen in your first 3 years of teaching.
Oh yeah, 100%.
and it finally, like, you hit a stride and you start to really understand
Yeah.
that what other people are doing in their classroom is awesome, like good for you, but that doesn't necessarily always have to work in my classroom because my kids are different. Even though maybe the teacher next door is teaching the same curriculum, we're teaching different kids.
Right.
So the way we get there and the way we connect them is different, and that's awesome. And it's imperfect, but that's kind of the best part of it because people are imperfect.
Yeah. No, I one of the most helpful things, again, right before teaching, was being told, think of the first 3 years as that's a big block of time. Your first three, don't solve, you're not going to solve this in 2 weeks. You're learning, forgiving oneself to learn that whole time as you're doing it, and to learn with the students and things like this. And then the second thing also, yeah, absolutely, great advice, saying, you can learn from other teachers, but you are never going to be those other teachers, because you have to find your own voice of doing this in the same way your students have to find their own voice. And they are not theoretical students in a textbook somewhere or something like this. They are, actual people. And again, they every human is different on a Tuesday than they are on a Thursday. And so just that dynamic. And I think I'm seeing on my thing 3 minutes left. I think that's a similar to answer to me too, which is, there was once I got past that there was a perfect way to introduce or present or connect the content, but rather how do you empower students to be historians themselves? Then the content and their study of it matches them wherever they are, right? And so if the question is, what did that look like? The same way that it was gradual, it was almost imperceptible, but going from that first day of not knowing who anybody is, through the process of, hand raising and note taking and all the different things, getting to the point where students did not realize they were continuously having what we often refer to as Socratic or some kind of dialogue, where they are watching, listening to each other. They're not sitting on an answer waiting for their turn, but rather saying to themselves, I hear you, I know who you are, I respect what you're saying, I may disagree, here's a follow-up question, that they know when to say it. There was an elegance is when it worked toward the end of the year on a good year. And I'm not saying I always got there at all, but the meeting people where they were when the act of studying was so internalized that it was imperceptible anymore, and was no longer something you did when you just walked in the classroom and suddenly the bell rings and it's history class. It just became part of their day. Again, for everybody, every day, no. But I can't say that for myself. So
even being online, like asking kids, I remember the whole thing about cameras being on or off.
Right.
And it was just like, I don't know, why don't you just ask your students, like,
Right.
hey, here's what I'm doing. Is this working? Because here's where we have to go.
Right.
But if we're not all in the car together getting there, let me know how we can do this.
Yeah. And that's a great analogy, being in the car together, like we're all in this, and we have a valuable a direction we're going, which is learning these things, and not because we have to, because we want to, and because they're cool and important and interesting, and what's going to help us get to where we're going.
Yeah. And be okay failing, because failing is how you learn.
Yeah. It's all a part of a journey. So as always, I said 10 seconds left. We hope that you have some ideas to share with us of how you meet your students where they are, both in terms of, where you're trying to go, but also how you're getting there together. Can't believe we hit our time, and it is time for our final section, which we always do, which is our mailbag. Again, if you are interested, if you're not watching this live, if you're not writing things in the chat, you can reach us through our social media handles at BRI. It's really BR Institute. It's BRI. It's a Bill of Rights Institute, BR Institute. And generally we can search as hashtag teacher time, BRI teacher time. So BRI teacher time. Rolls off the tongue. I got to get used to that. But you could do that, connect with us in lots of different ways. This week's question comes from a Michael T. Are you ready for this week's question?
Yes.
Here we go. How do you raise questions in class without appearing to advocate for a side. So I had the ability to follow up with Michael T about this question, and his question was basically, how do you even present the word choice or choosing to talk about a topic or one topic versus another in a way that isn't saying you're promoting that topic because you're bringing it up or because of the words that you're choosing? I'm putting you on the spot with that question.
I feel like, oof, um, I immediately go to, so the end of fourth quarter last year, we were learning about civil rights, and a student asked, how come we never learn about this group of people? And I was like, I don't know. That's a good question. Like, what do you want to learn about? Or for me, it took me a while to develop this. It was always putting it back on the kids. So when they'd ask a question, I'd be like, I don't know. What do you think? Or if they, want to learn about something, it's like, well, why do you want to learn about this? Like, I want to know more about it because I am just a facilitator of learning. So my opinions and I know that this is different in every classroom because that is always a thing, like sharing your politics in the classroom. Like, to me, it wasn't relevant in my classroom. And so I wanted them to think that they could ask anything and that we could learn anything, within a scope. So always going back and saying, I mean, I don't know. That's a good question. What do you guys think? Or even the materials I selected, sometimes it was, here's the stuff I found. It's not a perfect, source, or it's not the perfect thing that encapsulates everything. So if you find something else, please share it with me. We'd like to learn. That's a hard question because teachers are facing this, I think, all the time, but especially now when their lessons are being recorded or they're live and they have to navigate what that looks like. Oof, that's
yeah, no, it is, it's a great question because it is definitely one teachers face, right? And sometimes, I mean, as you're saying that, one, it sparks a really interesting, an important idea that when it's student generated is a very different thing than, so where the question comes from and how you handle that. But even when it is student generated, I mean, I think you're right, because there's the complexity of it, but there's also kind of, unfortunately, the realistic time, right? So we have faced similar things ourselves on this and in our programs where it's like, it's not that you don't want to talk about it. It's just, to talk about that is hours of conversation in a way. Maybe for someone else, maybe not so much, but just I found the tension as an educator was I have to engage with this extensively. And the things that unfortunately you cannot or choose to sometimes are dictated by, because you just can. And maybe it fits, in a club or something like this, but there's some things that are just, in order to do justice to something, it's going to take a while. And sometimes that logistics you just don't have. And that unfortunately comes across as, well, I don't care about this thing, or I don't know about this thing, or I don't want to bring up this thing. And it's often, I don't know your feeling on that, but it's often, we're all being real here.
Yeah, or I'm just not the expert at this. And I think that came up in our first teacher time where somebody, threw something out there, and it was a great question, but it's like, we can't talk about this in 2 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm not going to make an attempt to explain something for the sake of doing so, when I don't have the time, but B, there's probably somebody else that can better speak on this, because I'm not the expert at everything. And I don't want to ever portray to my students that I know everything, because I sure don't. And that's an okay thing. So that is, I think that would be a good question to kind of throw out to teachers too. Like, that'd be a good conversation with teachers. I would love to listen to that conversation.
Oh yeah,
because everybody's different, right?
Yeah. And that's what we're hoping to do, is to have those conversations with teachers, whether it is through this show or through any of our materials, or any of the work that we do, to invite teachers to dialogue about these things. So we do hope you do reach out to us, again, at BR Institute. And really the quickest way to get through us to anything is the world of hashtags, hashtag BRI Teacher Time. Or you can always email us and contact us through any of our different social media handles that we have. But really, if you're watching us on YouTube, right here is a way to do that as well, to keep up with us. So we do have shows every other week. BRI itself puts out shows at least twice a week. So be sure to check out anything from the Scholar Talks to Bridge from the Past, to lots of different opportunities that we have. But ultimately, we just want to thank you for tuning in. If you did like this video, make sure you subscribe. Come back. We'll be back on March 23rd for another Teacher Time. We'd like to tell you a little bit about them, right? So our themes, we have a central question for our episodes. The next one for the next episode, and we hope that you, within the next 2 weeks, reach out to us, is how do we connect students with people from the past and the present whose voices they might not typically hear, right? So there's sort of the typical people that you may hear in history classes and books, but what about the other voices? How do we hear from those other questions? So we'd love to know, like, what historical figure, and by historical we mean born prior to today, have you discovered that gave you a broader view of history? So what historical figure have you encountered that gave you a broader view of history that you might have encountered maybe after K through 12 or some other time? So anyway, think about that. We'd love to hear from you. Again, our YouTube channel releases new videos twice a week on all things U.S. history, including those close reads and homework help videos and lots of other things. And you can check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for updates on programs and events and other ways to get involved. So we'd love to hear from you. Comment your thoughts on the video below and get in touch with us with hashtag BRI Teacher Time. And once again, on behalf of all of us, thank you so much. Thank you, Liz, and it's nice chatting with you.
Thank you. It's nice